The conference room smelled faintly of polish and old paper, the way money does when it's been sitting still too long. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and watched the December sky fold over Charlotte like a gray blanket, the city moving on without noticing that Clara Mercer, my wife of 42 years, was no longer in it. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell icon, so you never miss powerful stories like this one. "Howard," Arthur Kane said gently behind me. "They're here." I turned as the door opened and Vanessa Rowe glided in first, winter white coat over a black dress, sunglasses pushed up like a crown. She looked at me the way a person looks at a parking ticket, mildly inconvenienced, certain you deserved it. Gregory followed, shoulders squared, jaw set. He'd taken to wearing suits with tight collars lately, as though respect could be buttoned on. Their son, Ethan, trailed behind them, thumbs drumming a silent beat on his phone, the rhythm of a boy who'd never had to wait for anything. "Mr. Mercer," Vanessa said, not father, not dad, not even Howard, just a last name, as if I were a vendor. The corners of her mouth lifted into a smile too thin to cast a shadow. "We're so sorry for your loss," she added, the way people apologize when their order comes late and they mean none of it. Gregory cleared his throat. "Let's get through this, okay? I have a call at 1. At the head of the table, Arthur laid a leather portfolio beside a glass carafe of water. He'd been our family's attorney since back when Clara and I could barely afford a mortgage. He had the kind of face that looks better with age because people grow into their decency. Today his eyes moved between the three of them and me, weighing the room like a scale hidden behind a smile. "Thank you for coming," he said. "As you know, we're here to review Clara's final directives and the disposition of Mercer Holdings." He paused then. "I want to note, for the record, that Clara prepared several addenda over the last year." Vanessa sat, crossing one elegant leg over the other. The heel of her shoe flashed like a small blade. "Of course she did," she murmured. "Clara adored her lists." Then, with that same winter sunshine expression, she aimed her words at me. "And I'm sure she discussed everything with you, to the extent you needed to understand. There are sentences that bruise the first time you hear them, and then bruise differently when they echo, to the extent you needed to understand. I felt Clara's absence like a seat left vacant on purpose. I also felt her presence, peculiar as that sounds, like the warmth you notice only when someone opens a door and the cold tries to come in. Arthur flipped a tab in the portfolio. "We'll begin with the estate inventory, real property, liquid assets, operating accounts, and then we'll address the trust instruments." He slid copies across the table. Vanessa didn't glance at the figures before tucking them out into a designer folder embossed with her initials. Gregory read, lips moving faintly as if he were sounding out the words. Ethan snapped a photo of the top sheet like it was a menu. "Is the condo in Naples included?" Vanessa asked. Her voice was polite, practiced, the way weather forecasters smile as they point at a storm. "Yes," Arthur said, "subject to the trust." "Subject," she repeated as if it were an insult. Then, looking straight at me, "Howard, you'll be comfortable, of course. Clara wouldn't have wanted inconvenience." The pause before the last word was surgical. "But Gregory and I will assume the responsibilities of the company. It's been a long time since you were active." Gregory's chair creaked. "We've talked about this, Dad. It's the right time for a transition." I thought of the workshop in our first warehouse, sawdust in the air, Clara in rolled-up sleeves, the two of us arguing about whether a latch should be brass or steel, because we believed details were the difference between a thing and a thing that lasted. I remembered how she smiled when we made it through our first winter without borrowing from her sister, and how she cried the day we signed the deed to the building with our name on it. Active wasn't a word that applied to or didn't apply to a person like a light switch. It was a way of being in love with a life you built and refusing to abandon it when people decided they preferred mirrors. "Clara set the structure," I said, taking my seat. "We'll follow it." Vanessa's smile didn't move. Of course, she turned to Arthur. And the trust's successor trustee language? Unchanged, I assume? Arthur's pen paused over the page. We'll get to that. From the end of the table, Ethan finally looked up. Grandpa, do we still get the beach house for spring break? He asked, eyes clear in the way of people who believe the world is a vending machine. One button, one treat. If the terms allow it, I said. Vanessa reached to squeeze his hand. Performative affection, a photograph she could use later. Don't worry, sweetheart. Your grandfather will be taken care of. You'll be taken care of. Everyone will be managed. Clara always said cruelty wears better when you tailor it in soft fabric. I heard her voice now, the one that never needed to be loud. Howard, people tell you who they are. Believe them the first time, but don't forget the ledger when they do it the 10th. Arthur turned a page. Numbers, titles, schedules, the engine room hum of an estate reading. Vanessa asked pointed, polished questions about distribution mechanics, which accounts were revocable, which timelines controlled vesting. Gregory nodded at her prompts, the way men nod when they like the way authority sounds coming from someone who will spend it on them. I listened, I watched, I let silence be useful. Because weeks earlier, on a quiet evening when the house still smelled like Clara's chamomile, and the guest room was full of casseroles from neighbors who didn't know where to put their hands, Arthur had knocked on my front door carrying a separate envelope. He didn't come in. He just placed it in my palm and said, "Hey, Clara asked me to wait until after the funeral." In her handwriting, looping exact, she had written, "Read this when their smiles start to feel cold." "Mr. Kane," Vanessa said, brightening, "before we drown in paperwork, let's address the obvious. Gregory is the natural successor to Mercer Holdings. He cares about the legacy. He knows the people. And frankly," her eyes slid to me and back, "we should spare Howard the stress." Arthur steepled his fingers. Clara addressed succession. "Excellent," she said, as if she'd ordered it. "Then we can schedule the transition. January 1st is elegant." Across the table, Gregory softened, mistaking the future for a gift bag with his name on the tag. Ethan grinned into his phone. Arthur closed the portfolio. "Clara appointed a successor trustee and set conditions precedent for control. Those conditions must be reviewed before any transition is discussed." Vanessa laughed lightly. "Conditions? Arthur, come on." Clara was meticulous, yes, but she wasn't theatrical. We're all family here. I felt the old ache move through me, the place grief lives and never vacates. Then I felt something else, anchored deeper, the part of me Clara built every time she handed me a problem and said, "We'll solve it, carefully." I placed my hands on the table. "Let Arthur finish." He nodded, grateful for the quiet. Clara's first directive, Howard remains as trustee with full authority, for life, unless and until he declines. The second, succession and beneficiary. Access are contingent on a fitness review, fiscal responsibility, personal conduct, and alignment with the trust's purpose. He held Vanessa's gaze. Clara defined purpose as the welfare and dignity of the family, not the lifestyle of its loudest members. Something flickered in Vanessa's eyes and went out. "Cute," she said, "but purpose can be interpreted." "By the trustee," Arthur replied. Gregory leaned forward, knuckles whitening. "So what? Dad gets to keep me out if he wants? Is that it?" "No," Arthur said. "Clara gets to keep you out if she wanted. She wrote the rules. Your father enforces them." The room adjusted around that sentence. Ethan lowered his phone an inch. Vanessa's lips pressed together until the lipstick shone like wet paint. I glanced at the envelope in my inside pocket, the one with Clara's handwriting, heavier now from being carried against my heart. I hadn't opened it yet. I'd carried it to the graveside and back, slept with it on, the nightstand like a lighthouse I wasn't ready to look at. But this morning, before I left the house, I slipped my thumb beneath the flap. Read this when their smiles start to feel cold. Inside, a single page, 10 sentences. every one of them a step I was either already taking or about to. "Howard," Vanessa said suddenly, sweet as store-bought frosting, "let's be honest. You were never a details person. Clara was. We all know that. It would honor her to let those of us who understand the mechanics handle them. You enjoy your... What is it you do now? Your garden? Ethan and I will attend to the company." I watched her shape the word honor and lay it between us like a rug to cover the trap she hoped I wouldn't see. Then I watched Gregory watch me, looking for the old father who wanted peace more than dignity. He'd known that man. He'd relied on him. Arthur slid a final sheet across the table. "There's also a private letter from Clara to the trustee," he said. "Per her instruction, it's for Howard's eyes only." He looked at me, not at them. "If the trustee believes its contents bear on today's decisions, he may summarize." Vanessa laughed again, brittle now. "A love note? How quaint." Clara's voice moved through me, steady as rain on a roof. "Do it kindly, do it completely. I didn't need to summarize, not yet, not in this room, not with this temperature. But I let my fingertips rest on the envelope in my pocket, so they'd know I had not come empty-handed. Gregory tried a different route, the one sons take when they remember the days their fathers lifted them over puddles and pretended not to feel the weight. "Dad," he said softer, "you know I've been working toward this. I deserve a chance." I studied him, the boy who scraped his knee on a bicycle one summer and swore he'd never ride again until Clara sat on the porch steps and told him she would hold the back of the seat until he didn't need her to. The man who, when I asked him last year to visit an old client who'd lost his wife, told me he was not good at grief. The person between those two was in this room, but I couldn't find him. "You'll get what Clara permitted?" I said. "No more, no less." Vanessa's smile returned, new paint over old wood. "Then let's be efficient. Arthur, draft whatever it is you need to draft. Oh, we can revisit in the new year. I'd like to get to Naples before the 15th. Arthur's pen clicked once. He didn't move. The room held still around us. The carafe's glass, the view's gray, the way a building waits for a storm to decide whether to pass or stay. I could have ended it right then. I could have opened Clara's letter and laid its sentences on the table like cards that win. Not because they are aces, but because the game is played by people who forgot how to count. Instead, I did what Clara always did when the other side thought the conversation was finished. I poured water into my glass, took a careful sip, and said, "We're not done." Vanessa tilted her head. "No?" "No," I said. "Clara set one more condition for fitness. We'll address it at the appropriate time." I looked at Arthur. He nodded, a secret acknowledged without being revealed. Ethan broke the silence with a yawn he didn't bother to hide. "Can we go? This is boring." "Only to people who don't understand what lasts," I said. My voice surprised me, how even it sounded, how little work it took. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and felt the envelope press against my ribs, like a hand I knew well. Outside the window, the color of the day didn't change. Inside me, something did. The next steps had already been written in Clara's script. All I had to do was walk them in my shoes. "Same time next week," Arthur said, rising. "We'll reconvene." Vanessa gathered her folder, stood and paused long enough to rest a polished fingernail on the table. "Howard," she said mildly, "try to remember that gratitude looks good on everyone." I held her gaze. "So does kindness." She left first, Gregory after her. Ethan last, pocketing a pen that didn't belong to him because it would never occur to him that things did. When the door latched, the room exhaled. Arthur and I were alone, with a stack of papers and a widow's letter. He reached for the carafe, poured water into my glass again, and set it in front of me the way you set a tool in a friend's hand. "You did well," he said. "I didn't do anything," I answered. He smiled. "Exactly." I slipped the envelope back into my pocket and pressed my palm to it until the warmth passed through the paper. When their smiles start to feel cold, Clara had written. I'd felt the cold today. I'd also felt the furnace she left behind. We walked out together, two older men in winter coats, stepping into December with the knowledge that grief, like love, is a kind of weather. You can't bargain with it, but you can be ready for it. Clara had been ready. Now it was my turn. The house felt like an empty chest with the lid left open. After the inheritance meeting, I came home and found myself drifting into Clara's sewing room, a place she used more for thinking than for stitching. The air still carried her lavender sachets, the faint trace of soap she favored, and that invisible quality of a life that lingers in the walls after the body is gone. I sat in her chair by the window, the one where she used to balance her glasses low on her nose while writing lists. Clara was never without a list. To me, they'd seem small at the time, reminders to pick up milk, to call the roofer, to check in on her sister. But the truth was, she'd been writing a larger list her whole life. Every line was preparation, every note a precaution, every margin scribble a promise I hadn't understood until now. I could almost hear her voice as I sat. There. She had a way of speaking softly, yet leaving no room for argument. Howard, she used to tell me, wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you protect. The memory that pressed hardest on me came from a winter night 15 years ago. We were sitting by the fire, snow falling in fat flakes outside. I'd been reading the paper when she reached over, touched my wrist, and said, You know, one day they might forget what we built. They might even resent it. But we can't let them use Nolan's or anyone else's life to prove themselves. I hadn't argued, but I'd brushed it off at the time, thinking her worries were too heavy for a night meant for warmth. Looking back now, she'd been right. She'd known Vanessa's hunger before I ever did. She'd sensed Gregory's passivity, long before he started bowing his head at her every suggestion. She'd seen the way Ethan's entitlement was being fed instead of disciplined. Clara had carried that foresight the way some people carry a candle, never flaunting it, but never letting it go out either. She'd built the trust not as a monument, but as armor, not for herself, but for me, and for the family that deserved dignity, not indulgence. I opened the cedar box on the shelf, where Clara had kept her keepsakes. Inside were scraps of fabric, ticket stubs from a trip to Maine, and a small leather-bound notebook. Her handwriting marched across the pages, clean and deliberate. On the first page, If Howard finds this, it means my voice is needed, where my body cannot be. My throat tightened as I read. She'd written down memories, notes about each family member, warnings wrapped in affection. About Gregory, he will always want direction. If it comes from me, it steadies him. If it comes from Vanessa, it poisons him. About Ethan, he needs discipline disguised as love, not love disguised as freedom. And about me, Howard will forget he is stronger than silence. Remind him. I shut the notebook gently and pressed it to my chest. For years I had thought myself the stronger one, the shield for our family. Now I realized Clara had been the architect of the walls that protected us, even when I didn't see them. The inheritance meeting wasn't a surprise to her. It was a scene she had scripted long before, knowing the characters would play their parts. She had left me not just assets, but instructions, moral, emotional, legal. It was my job to step into the role she'd written for me. The silence of the room pressed against me, and I whispered into it, I hear you, Clara. I hear you. Somewhere beyond the glass, the city carried on, but inside this house, her wisdom was still alive. And it was reminding me that the smirks, the arrogance, the entitlement, they weren't the end of the story. They were just the beginning of the test she'd prepared us both for. The following week, we gathered again in the same conference room. The air was sharper, this time as though the walls themselves had caught the scent of tension and were holding it for us. Arthur Kane was already there, files arranged with the care of a man who knew how easily families could come undone when paper was involved. Vanessa Rowe entered first, as always. She carried herself like a queen late to her own coronation, her perfume cutting the air like a blade dulled by arrogance. Gregory trailed behind, stiff in his dark suit, trying to borrow dignity from fabric he hadn't earned. Ethan slid into his chair with a bored yawn, phone in hand, tapping out a rhythm that grated on the silence. Arthur began with routine updates, asset valuations, distribution schedules. His voice was calm, steady, but I could see the glances Vanessa exchanged with Gregory. They weren't listening for information. They were listening for opportunity. When Arthur paused to turn a page, Vanessa leaned forward, her smile stretched just enough to show teeth. "Howard, it really is time we simplify things. You've done your part. Clara wouldn't want you burdened." "Burdened?" I asked softly. "With responsibility," she replied smoothly. "At your age, it must be exhausting. The travel, the management, the decisions. Gregory and I are more than ready to take over. Isn't that right, dear?" Gregory nodded, though his eyes slid toward me nervously. Yes, Dad. We'll carry it forward, and Ethan will learn to carry it after us," Vanessa added, brushing her son's shoulder like she was polishing an heirloom. "Legacy, you see, requires youthful hands." Ethan didn't look up from his phone. "As long as we still get the cars in the house, right?" Vanessa's smile sharpened, but she didn't scold him. She only patted his arm as though entitlement were a crown to be adjusted, not a flaw to be corrected. I looked at Gregory. "Is this what you want?" His jaw tightened. "It's what makes sense. You've run things long enough. Vanessa and I, well, we know how to modernize, how to grow. You're comfortable, Dad. It's our turn." Our turn. The words hung between us, heavy with expectation, hollow of gratitude. I remembered the nights Clara and I had stayed up, counting every penny, wondering if the company would make it through the winter. Gregory had been a child then, warm in his bed, safe because of the sacrifices we made. Now he sat across from me, speaking as though comfort were something he had invented rather than inherited. Arthur cleared his throat. "Clara's directives remain in force. Transition is subject to conditions she set." Vanessa laughed lightly. "Arthur, let's be realistic. Clara loved her family. She wouldn't want us tangled in red tape. She trusted us to carry her vision." She looked straight at me, her voice sliding into something colder, "and she trusted you to know when to step aside." Ethan finally put his phone down and leaned back. "Yeah, Grandpa, you don't need all this. You should just chill. Travel, play golf. Let Dad and Mom handle the business. We'll keep it fun." The boy's words were thoughtless, but they cut deep, because they revealed the truth. He didn't see the company as legacy or sacrifice. He saw it as a toy chest he could rummage through at will. I felt Clara's presence then, the way I had in her sewing room. Her voice echoed in memory. "Howard, believe people when they show you what they value. They won't hide it forever." Vanessa turned back to Arthur. "So can we accelerate this process? There's no sense in dragging it out." Arthur's face didn't change, but I saw his knuckles tighten on the folder. "We cannot bypass conditions. Clara anticipated—" "Anticipated?" Vanessa cut in, her tone now openly mocking. "Anticipated what? That Gregory wouldn't be fit? That Ethan wouldn't be ready? That I wouldn't be capable? Really, Arthur, don't make this into something it isn't. We are the future of Mercer Holdings. Howard knows it. Everyone does." Her words landed like cold rain on stone, sharp but hollow. And for the first time, I let a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Not because I was amused, but because Clara had been right. Their greed wasn't something I needed to uncover. It was something they would display proudly, until it wrapped around their necks like a rope. "Clara anticipated more than you realize," I said quietly. The table went silent. Vanessa blinked. Gregory frowned. Ethan reached for his phone again, and Arthur, bless him, allowed himself the faintest of nods. The greed was no longer hidden. It was exposed, and soon it would be weighed. The meeting had ended, but Arthur lingered after Vanessa. Gregory and Ethan left the room. Their laughter echoed down the hallway, hollow and sharp, as though they were celebrating a victory they hadn't earned yet. I remained seated, hands folded on the table, the envelope with Clara's handwriting pressing against my chest, like a hidden truth I wasn't ready to show. Arthur closed the door softly and returned to his chair. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. He adjusted his glasses, his expression solemn, his eyes weighing me as though searching for fractures in stone. "Howard," he said finally, his voice low, "you need to be careful. Vanessa is pressing too hard. Gregory, he's blind, but she isn't. She'll push until you either yield or break." I leaned back, the leather creaking beneath me. "She thinks I already have." Arthur studied me for a moment. "Do you want to prove her wrong?" I looked out at the city skyline, at the lights blinking on as dusk spread its wings. "Clara left me the tools. I'm just not sure when to use them." Arthur reached into his folder and withdrew a slim file bound with a blue ribbon. He placed it in front of me. "Clara anticipated this. She knew they would circle you. Like wolves. This," he tapped the folder, "is the hammer. But you'll have to decide when to swing it." I opened the folder. Inside were documents I hadn't seen before. Clauses Clara had insisted on, notarized statements, and most importantly, a note in her hand, witnessed and sealed. My throat tightened as I read the first line. "Howard, if Arthur is handing this to you, then the storm I feared has arrived." "She wrote that nearly a year ago," Arthur said gently. "She knew Vanessa's nature. She knew Gregory's weakness. She even anticipated Ethan's entitlement. But she also knew you." "And what did she know?" I asked. "That you'd hesitate," Arthur said without flinching. "That you'd choose peace over confrontation if you could. Clara didn't fault you for that. She loved you for it. But she wanted to remind you, sometimes silence is complicity." The words hit like a bell rung in my chest. Clara had said something similar years ago when we faced a ruthless supplier trying to corner us out of a deal. I had wanted to compromise. She had stood her ground. We had kept our business because of her refusal to bend. Arthur leaned forward. "Vanessa wants control of everything. Gregory will nod along because he thinks it makes him look strong. Ethan," he shook his head, "that boy doesn't understand what legacy means. He only knows what it buys." I closed the folder carefully, pressing my palm against it. "And what if I fail?" Arthur's gaze sharpened. "Clara didn't build this for you to fail. She left clear conditions. If they trip over them, it won't be because you struck. It'll be because they exposed themselves." The thought settled into me like a stone sinking into water. Clara's voice echoed in my memory again. "Do it kindly. Do it completely." Arthur rose, slipping on his coat. "Howard, when their greed blinds them, and it will, you must be ready to act. The law can only enforce what's written, but the dignity, that will come from how you choose to stand." I stood too, shaking his hand. His grip was steady, reassuring. "Thank you, Arthur." He gave a faint smile. "Don't thank me. Thank Clara. She built the armor. I'm just helping you wear it." As he left, I remained in the empty conference room, the folder in my hand and the city lights flickering to life beyond the glass. The battle hadn't begun, not really, but Clara had already laid the battlefield, and Arthur had just shown me the weapon. And for the first time since she died, I felt ready, not for grief, but for the fight. The winter sun had not yet cleared the rooftops when I arrived at the Mercer Holdings headquarters for the quarterly board meeting. Clara and I had built this company brick by brick, decision by decision, but today the building felt more like a stage than a workplace. Vanessa had made sure of that. She arrived late, sweeping into the boardroom in a crimson dress that demanded attention. Gregory walked behind her, silent, his eyes down as though he were a guest in his own life. Ethan followed, grinning at his reflection in the polished glass door before sliding into a chair, his phone already in hand. Vanessa didn't look at me right away. Instead, she greeted each board member personally, warm, familiar, the kind of charm polished for an audience. She lingered with Mr. Halverson, one of our oldest investors, whispering something that made him chuckle. She clasped Mrs. Whitfield's hands dramatically, as if the two of them were long-lost friends. Then finally she turned her attention to me. "Howard," she said sweetly, though her eyes were sharp, "I hope you don't mind, but I've taken the liberty of preparing today's agenda. Efficiency, you understand." She handed Arthur a glossy folder before placing one in front of each director. Mine arrived last, slid toward me like an afterthought. I opened it. Her agenda wasn't about operations or strategy or planning. It was a carefully drafted case for my retirement. Each page dressed in polite language, yet every sentence carried the same message. I was obsolete. Across the table, Mrs. Whitfield frowned, flipping through the pages. "Vanessa, this isn't quite standard procedure." "Oh, it's just a proposal," Vanessa interrupted, her voice velvet wrapped around steel. "Of course the board will decide, but I thought it better to be proactive. Howard's done enough for this company. He deserves rest." She turned to me with a smile, just wide enough to sting. "Don't you agree, Howard? Don't you want to enjoy what's left without stress?" A ripple of discomfort moved around the table. They weren't used to open confrontation, especially not framed as kindness. I said nothing at first, letting the silence stretch. Vanessa thrived on control, but she hated quiet she couldn't fill. "Vanessa," Arthur interjected calmly, "the trust's conditions don't allow for unilateral changes." She waved a dismissive hand. "We all respect Clara's wishes, of course, but surely Clara couldn't have intended to trap Howard in a role he's no longer suited for. She loved him too much for that." The cruelty of that sentence wasn't in the words, but in the delivery. She spoke as though Clara's love had expired with her life, as though it could now be twisted to serve Vanessa's ambition. Gregory finally spoke. "Mom," he stopped himself, glancing at me, then corrected. "Vanessa's right, Dad. You shouldn't have to carry this weight anymore. Let us do it." "Weight?" I asked softly. "Or power?" He flinched but said nothing. Ethan, oblivious to the gravity of the moment, smirked. "Come on, Grandpa, don't be selfish. You've had your time. It's our turn." The words were careless, but they sliced deeper than he knew. Selfish. After decades of sacrifice, after nights, Clara and I, spent worrying about payroll, after years spent nurturing something for them to inherit. Now I was selfish for refusing to hand it over like a party favor. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, victorious in the silence. "Howard, no one wants this to be ugly. Step aside gracefully and you'll still be honored. Insist on clinging and, well, people might start to wonder if you've lost perspective." She had staged this moment carefully, in front of the board, in front of witnesses, so her humiliation of me would be complete. To her, this was a game, a performance, and she thought she'd already won. I felt Clara's letter in my pocket, the weight of her script guiding me. Do it kindly, do it completely. So I smiled, not coldly, not cruelly, but calmly. "Vanessa," I said, my voice even, "it's a brave thing to confuse ambition with ability, but it's not the first time I've seen it." The board shifted, sensing the tension. Vanessa's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. She had expected me to break, to yield, to retreat. Instead, I had stayed standing, without raising my voice, without lifting a finger. Her humiliation game was only beginning, but so was mine. By the time the board meeting adjourned, the air felt like it had been carved into pieces. Vanessa had gotten what she wanted, an audience for her show of dominance. But she wasn't finished. For people like her, victory wasn't real until it was rubbed into the skin of the defeated. That evening, she hosted a dinner at Gregory's house. Technically, it was their house, though it was purchased with Mercer money and furnished with Clara's touch before Vanessa stripped it bare of sentiment. The invitation was framed as family bonding, but I knew better. This was her stage for humiliation, the second act of her play. The dining room sparkled with crystal and polished silver, candles flickering against tall mirrors. The table was long, too long for the number of people present, leaving empty space that seemed to magnify the tension. Vanessa had dressed the part again, a shimmering gown that caught the light each time she moved. Gregory sat beside her, stiff, obedient, a man pretending to be a pillar, when in truth he was leaning on her shadow. Ethan sprawled in his chair, tapping at his phone until Vanessa shot him a glance sharp enough to slice meat. Then he sat upright, trying to mimic the poise of someone who believed himself important. When I arrived, Vanessa's lips curved in a smile that never touched her eyes. "Howard, how lovely you could join us. We weren't sure you'd be comfortable considering everything." I gave a nod, not offering her the satisfaction of a reaction. Clara used to say, "The strongest wall is silence when someone expects noise." Dinner began with small talk, though the words were brittle. Vanessa dominated the conversation, spinning anecdotes about Gregory's supposed leadership, Ethan's brilliance, her own sacrifices. It wasn't conversation, it was theater, and each line was delivered with glances at me, daring me to interrupt. At one point, she leaned back in her chair, glass of wine in hand. "Howard, don't you think Gregory has the makings of a fine leader? He has your legacy in him." I looked at my son, though the word son felt heavy, conflicted now. Gregory's eyes met mine, and for a brief second I saw doubt flicker there, a child's need for approval beneath a man's rigid mask. Then he looked away, as though Vanessa's gaze commanded more loyalty than mine ever had. "He has potential," I said evenly. "Potential requires discipline and integrity." Vanessa's smile thinned. "And you don't think he has those?" "I think discipline and integrity are proven," I said, "not claimed." A silence followed, thick as the candle smoke curling toward the ceiling. Ethan broke it with a laugh. "Grandpa, you sound like some motivational poster. Times have changed. Nobody cares about discipline. It's about power now. Who has it? Who takes it?" Vanessa didn't correct him. She raised her glass instead, eyes locked on mine. Spoken like someone who understands the world already. The cruelty of her performance wasn't in the words themselves, but in the design of it, every moment orchestrated to make me the relic, the man whose time had passed. She wanted me to feel small at my own table, in my own family. And for a moment, I felt it. The weight of years, the emptiness of loss, the ache of being outnumbered in my own blood. But then I remembered Clara's words. Do it kindly. Do it completely. She hadn't told me to do it quickly. I set my fork down and looked at Vanessa squarely. Clara used to say that the loudest person at the table is usually the least certain of their place. You might remember that. The smile on her face faltered. Gregory glanced nervously at her. Ethan frowned, confused by the shift in tone. The dinner carried on, but the performance had cracked. Later that night, as I walked out into the cold air, I realized something vital. Vanessa wasn't just greedy. She was reckless. And reckless people dig their own graves. All I had to do was make sure she kept digging. The breaking point hadn't been for me, it had been for her. The night after that dinner, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the study Clara and I had shared for decades, surrounded by shelves of ledgers, photo albums, and contracts that told the story of a life we had built together. Outside, the winter wind pressed against the windows like a restless visitor. Inside, silence clung to me, heavier than grief, heavier than the weight of years. I pulled Clara's envelope from my jacket pocket and laid it on the desk. My fingers traced her handwriting again, firm, certain, unmistakably hers. I hadn't opened it fully yet, just glimpsed the opening lines. Tonight, I unfolded the page. Her words were written in that steady script of hers. "Howard, I know you will hesitate. That is your nature, and I love you for it. But hesitation is not the same as surrender. You must not mistake silence for peace. When the time comes, you will need to stand, not because you want to, but because they expect you not to." I read the lines again and again until the ink seemed to lift from the paper and etch itself onto my heart. Clara had known me better than I knew myself. She had known Vanessa too, and Gregory, and even Ethan. She had prepared for their cruelty the way a shipwright prepares for storms, not hoping to avoid them, but building stronger beams so the vessel would survive them. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the photograph of Clara that sat on the desk, her smiling at me on our 30th anniversary, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked proud, not of wealth or status, but of the life we had built together. The truth washed over me then. I had been playing Vanessa's game, waiting, absorbing her insults, thinking patience would keep the peace. But Clara hadn't left me patience. She had left me a map. I thought of Gregory, sitting silently at Vanessa's side, his shoulders hunched as though burdened by her ambition. He was my son, or so I had always believed. But Clara's words hinted at something deeper, something I hadn't yet dared to confront. The way Arthur had spoken about conditions, the way he'd said Clara had anticipated everything. A suspicion stirred in me, one I didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. I rose and paced the room, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. Clara hadn't written riddles. She'd written instructions, and one line stood out more sharply than the rest. Do it kindly. Do it completely. Kindly didn't mean weak. It meant with dignity, with control, without lowering myself to their cruelty. Completely meant no halfway measures, no compromises, no leaving Vanessa an inch to twist into a mile. I stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker against the darkness. The skyline had grown since Clara and I first started Mercer Holdings. Skyscrapers stretched taller, brighter, but I realized something. Buildings, like families, are only as strong as their foundation. And right now, Vanessa was trying to build on sand. I turned back to the desk and pulled out the folder Arthur had given me, the hammer, as he called it. Inside were documents, financial records, and clauses Clara had written into the trust. There were notations about Gregory's obligations, requirements for succession, and, most chilling of all, a sealed DNA report I hadn't noticed before. My hand shook as I touched it. I didn't open it. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face what Clara might have uncovered, but I knew this much. The truth was inside, waiting for the right moment. That night, for the first time since Clara's death, I felt something stir in me beyond grief, resolve. I would not yield to Vanessa's smirk, or Gregory's silence, or Ethan's careless laughter. I would not let Clara's foresight go to waste. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about dignity, about protecting what Clara and I had built, about ensuring her voice still mattered even after she was gone. As I folded the letter and slid it back into its envelope, I whispered into the empty room, "I hear you, Clara. I'll stand, and I'll finish what you started." The night seemed to shift then, the wind outside softening as though even the winter knew a decision had been made. I was no longer waiting, I was preparing. The house was quiet the following morning, but my mind was not. I couldn't stop thinking about the folder Arthur had placed in my hands, especially that sealed envelope buried among the documents. I deliberately ignored it the night before, but Clara's handwriting on the cover was like a whisper I could no longer refuse. I sat at my desk, the winter light slanting across the wood, and pulled the envelope free. The seal cracked easily, though the weight of it felt like a mountain pressing down. Inside was a single sheet, an official DNA report, notarized and dated less than a year ago. My eyes ran over the words, and for a moment the air in the room seemed to vanish. Gregory Mercer, not biologically related. The page shook in my hands. I forced myself to keep reading, each line slicing deeper. Clara had ordered the test quietly, perhaps sensing what I had never dared to question. Gregory was not my blood. He had never been my son in the truest sense, though I had raised him, loved him, believed in him. I closed my eyes and let the shock roll through me. Clara had known. She must have carried this truth silently, choosing the moment of its revelation with precision, and she had left it for me, trusting that I would know when to use it. At the bottom of the report was another name, Daniel Cross. My breath caught. The accompanying documents explained what Clara had pieced together. Years ago, during a fragile chapter of our marriage, there had been questions, moments of distance I hadn't understood. Clara, meticulous as always, had sought answers quietly, not to punish, but to prepare. Daniel was my son by blood, the child I never knew I had. He had grown into a man on his own, without my name, without my guidance. Yet Clara had found him, met him, and ensured he was woven into the fabric of her final plans. A note in Clara's hand was clipped to the report. Howard, the truth is never kind, but it is necessary. Gregory will never stand on his own because he was never built on our foundation. Daniel is. Do not see this as a betrayal, but as an opportunity to restore what is rightfully yours. When the time comes, he will stand beside you, not above you, and you will know you are not alone. I set the paper down slowly, my hands trembling. My whole life had shifted in a single morning. Gregory's obedience to Vanessa suddenly made sense. He had no anchor in me, no roots to hold him steady. And Daniel had been living a life outside of all of this, away from greed and manipulation, perhaps carrying the integrity Clara valued so much. I rose and paced the room, the floorboards creaking under my steps. Rage threatened to flare in me, but Clara's words steadied it. Do it kindly. Do it completely. This wasn't about anger. It was about truth, about legacy, about ensuring the Mercer name was tied to dignity rather than deceit. When Arthur arrived later that day, I handed him the report. His eyes flicked over the pages, then back to me. She knew, he said quietly. Yes, I answered. She knew everything. Arthur leaned against the desk. This changes the game. Vanessa will never see it coming. Gregory. I don't know how he'll react, but Ethan, he'll crumble with her. And Daniel? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. Arthur's expression softened. Daniel is steady. I've met him. Clara made sure he was prepared for this moment. He doesn't want wealth. He wants respect. And that makes him more dangerous to Vanessa than any number in a bank account. I let that sink in. For the first time in weeks, a sense of strength surged through me. I wasn't fighting alone. Clara had left me an air not of vanity, but of integrity. The discovery burned in my chest, not as grief, not as betrayal, but as clarity. Vanessa thought she had the board. Gregory thought he had a birthright. Ethan thought he had a playground. But what they didn't know was that Clara had rewritten the script long before they ever rehearsed their lines. The truth was mine now, and when I chose to reveal it, their game would be over. The truth had shifted the ground beneath my feet, but it hadn't broken me. If anything, it had anchored me more firmly than ever. I now understood why Clara had been so deliberate, why she had insisted on conditions that seemed excessive to Vanessa and Gregory. She hadn't been protecting wealth. She had been protecting dignity. And now, with Daniel revealed as my true heir, I had to ensure that the transition was airtight. Arthur returned the next morning, briefcase in hand, his face set in the serious expression of a man who knew how fragile justice could be without evidence. He laid out the documents on my study desk like a general spreading maps before a campaign. We can't rely on a single DNA report, he said. Vanessa will challenge it, tear at every corner until she convinces someone it's fabricated. We'll need witnesses, corroboration, a trail of integrity that makes this undeniable. I nodded. Clara knew this. That's why she kept records. We'll follow her map. We spent hours combing through her files, uncovering layers of protection she had left behind. There were notarized affidavits from doctors, sealed statements from confidants, and even financial records tracing Clara's quiet support of Daniel over the years. Each page spoke of her foresight, her unwillingness to leave me or Daniel unprepared. At one point, Arthur paused, handing me a small envelope Clara had marked, "For Howard, when doubt clouds your resolve." Inside was a single line written in her careful hand. "The truth will not defend itself. You must stand for it." The words steadied me again. I folded the note and slid it into my pocket, where it would remain until the day I needed it most. Later that afternoon, Arthur and I visited the courthouse to file preliminary notices. The clerk, a tired man with ink-stained fingers, raised an eyebrow at the stack of documents, but stamped each one carefully. With every thud of his seal, I felt Clara's plan becoming more real, less fragile. We also met with 2 board members privately, Mrs. Whitfield and Mr. Halverson. Both had been longtime supporters of Clara and respected her judgment. When Arthur explained the conditions of the trust and hinted at the evidence soon to be revealed, I watched their faces shift from doubt to quiet resolve. "Clara was always 3 steps ahead," Mrs. Whitfield murmured. "If she left this, I believe it." Halverson nodded. I never trusted Vanessa's smile, too sharp at the edges. Their support mattered more than they knew. The board wasn't just a collection of signatures, it was the backbone of Mercer Holdings, and Vanessa's confidence depended on their silence. Once they began to waver, her empire of arrogance would begin to crumble. That night, alone again in my study, I reviewed the folder Arthur had prepared. It was no longer just a collection of papers. It was a shield and a sword, each document a piece of proof that Vanessa couldn't dismiss with a laugh or a smirk. But what gave me the deepest strength wasn't the paperwork, it was Daniel. Clara had trusted him, prepared him, believed he would stand not out of greed, but out of integrity. I hadn't met him yet, not formally, but I felt as though I already knew him. Through Clara's notes, through Arthur's words, through the quiet thread of respect woven into every page, Daniel had become a presence in my life even before his arrival. As I placed the folder back into the safe, I realized something profound. Vanessa had been fighting for power, Gregory for validation, Ethan for entitlement, but I was fighting for Clara, for truth, for Daniel, and in that fight, I would not lose. The day of the formal inheritance session arrived with the heaviness of a storm. The boardroom was polished, brighter than usual, the carafe of water set neatly at the center, as though appearances could disguise the truth about to be unveiled. I sat at the head of the table, Clara's letter in my pocket and Arthur beside me, his briefcase brimming with evidence. Vanessa swept in first, her heels striking the floor with the rhythm of victory already claimed. Gregory followed, stiff and anxious, while Ethan trailed behind, more interested in his phone than the fate of his family. Board members trickled in after them, Mrs. Whitfield, Mr. Halverson, and others, all taking their seats, eyes flicking between us, sensing the tension but not yet knowing the shape of it. Arthur stood, clearing his throat. "We are here today to review Clara Mercer's directives regarding Mercer Holdings and the distribution of her estate. As her appointed trustee, Howard retains authority until the conditions are satisfied." Vanessa leaned forward, smile polished like glass. "Arthur, let's not drag this out again. Everyone knows Howard is tired. It's time for Gregory and me to assume responsibility. We've prepared a transition plan already." She slid a folder across the table with a flourish. Gregory nodded quickly, echoing her confidence, though his eyes betrayed nerves. Ethan looked up just long enough to say, "Yeah, let's move this along," before returning to his screen. Arthur placed his hand on the folder, but didn't open it. Instead, he drew out the documents Clara had left. Clara anticipated these discussions. She also left explicit conditions that must be addressed before any transfer of control. Those conditions are binding. Vanessa's smile thinned, but she held her composure. Conditions, conditions. Clara adored her puzzles, but surely you don't expect us to believe she intended to paralyze the company with red tape. "She intended to protect it," Arthur replied calmly. I leaned forward then, my voice steady. Clara loved this family. She built safeguards not to paralyze us, but to ensure our legacy wasn't corrupted by greed or entitlement. Vanessa's gaze snapped to me, sharp as broken glass. "And who decides what greed or entitlement looks like? You?" The room stilled. Board members shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but curious. I let the silence stretch before answering. No, Clara did, and she left the evidence to prove it. Arthur slid the first set of documents across the table, Clara's notarized conditions outlining the requirements for succession, fiscal responsibility, integrity, conduct aligned with the welfare of the family. Vanessa's mask flickered for the first time. That's subjective, she said quickly. No, Arthur replied. It's documented, and it's enforceable. I watched Gregory's face pale as Arthur continued, outlining examples of mismanagement and lavish spending traced directly to Vanessa and Ethan. The room grew heavier with every line. The board members leaned in, their eyes sharpening, their trust shifting. Ethan finally snapped. This is ridiculous. Grandpa doesn't need this money anyway. Just give it to us already. The outburst rang through the room, childish and entitled, stripping away the last pretense of dignity. Vanessa's jaw clenched, but she couldn't undo the damage. I looked at Gregory then. You've let her speak for you all this time. Tell us, Gregory, what exactly have you built? What weight have you carried? His lips parted, but no words came. He looked to Vanessa, then back to me, trapped between the truth and the shadow he had chosen to live in. The boardroom felt colder than winter air. Clara's letter pressed against my chest, her voice steady in my memory. Do it kindly, do it completely. I stood, my hand resting on the documents Arthur had lined up. We're not finished yet. There is one final truth Clara left us, and when it's revealed, this conversation will not just be about control. It will be about identity. Gasps rippled through the room. Vanessa's eyes widened, though she quickly masked it with a laugh. More theatrics, Howard. What next? A ghost? I met her gaze without flinching. Not a ghost, a son. The storm had broken. The showdown was no longer about strategy. It was about blood, about truth, about the cracks in the foundation Vanessa thought she had secured, and soon those cracks would collapse beneath her feet. The boardroom had gone silent after my last words. The only sound was the faint hum of the heater, filling the pause that weighed on everyone present. Vanessa's smirk had faltered, just slightly, but she was quick to repair it. Gregory sat stiff, pale, unsure whether to glare at me or look away. Ethan leaned back, rolling his eyes, pretending this was all beneath him. Arthur placed a sealed envelope in front of me. The same envelope I had opened in the solitude of my study now lay on the polished oak table, carrying the truth Clara had prepared long before. I rested my hand on it, feeling the paper beneath my palm, feeling Clara's presence in the steadiness of my breath. Clara left a final condition, I said, my voice calm but resonant. It wasn't about money or property or accounts. It was about blood, about truth. Vanessa laughed, brittle and sharp. Really, Howard, you'll invent anything to cling to control. What's next? Some soap opera plot twist? Arthur slid the report across the table to the board members. Mrs. Whitfield's hand trembled slightly as she read. Halverson leaned forward, his brows knitting. One by one, the pages were passed around, their silence louder than Vanessa's scoff. What is this supposed to prove? Vanessa snapped. I looked directly at Gregory. His eyes were wide now, locked on the document in front of him, but not truly seeing it. Gregory, I said softly, you've always been my son in my heart. I raised you. I guided you. But the truth is, Clara discovered something she couldn't ignore. You are not my blood. The words fell into the room like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples reaching everyone. Gregory's face drained of color. Ethan muttered, What? His bravado slipping. Vanessa's composure cracked. That's absurd. Fabricated. You expect us to believe some piece of paper? Arthur cut her off, his voice firm. This is a legally certified DNA report, notarized and filed under Clara Mercer's instruction. Verified. Binding. It is not a matter of belief. It is a matter of fact. Vanessa rose halfway from her chair, fury tightening her features. Clara's dead. She can't defend this. She can't speak for what she meant. She already did, I said, pulling a second note from my jacket. Clara's handwriting was unmistakable, her words precise. Howard, if they challenge the truth, remind them I built this company on honesty. Lies will not be its legacy. I laid the note down beside the report. Vanessa's shoulders stiffened, her mask unraveling as the board members whispered among themselves. Then Arthur placed another file on the table. And there is more. Clara identified the rightful heir, Howard's biological son, Daniel Cross. The name cut through the room like a blade. Board members looked at each other, confused but attentive. Gregory's eyes snapped up, searching my face for denial, for reassurance, for anything. Ethan muttered again, this time more like a child. Who the hell is that? I kept my voice steady. Daniel is my blood. He is the man Clara found and trusted. He is not here for money or power. He is here because he carries the integrity this family has forgotten. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vanessa's fists clenched, her nails biting into her palms. Gregory sat frozen, torn between rage and despair. Ethan looked lost, his arrogance collapsing without its foundation. Mrs. Whitfield leaned forward, her voice firm. If Clara trusted Daniel, and the documents confirm it, then there is no debate. The trust must honor her directives. Halverson nodded slowly. This explains everything. Clara saw what we could not. For the first time, Vanessa had no retort. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The board's judgment was already tilting, and she knew it. I stood, buttoning my jacket. The truth is not always kind, but it is complete. Clara saw to that, and today we honor her, not with greed, not with arrogance, but with honesty. The boardroom seemed smaller then, as though the walls themselves were closing in around Vanessa and Gregory. They had spent weeks pressing me into the corner, believing I was too old, too tired, too broken. They never realized Clara had already prepared my escape and their downfall. The revelation was complete, and the reckoning had only just begun. The boardroom had become a different place after the truth settled. No one dared to glance at Vanessa's folder of plans anymore. It sat untouched, an artifact of arrogance that no longer had weight. Gregory sat rigid, his face pale and blank, as though every pillar he had leaned on had suddenly vanished. Ethan slumped in his chair, phone forgotten, his bravado cracked open like an eggshell. Vanessa, however, refused to bow. She straightened her spine and forced a smile that was all sharp edges. "This means nothing," she hissed. "Gregory was raised as Howard's son. He has carried the Mercer name all his life. Blood isn't everything." Arthur adjusted his glasses and spoke with the firmness of a man who knew the law was at his back. "The trust doesn't leave this to interpretation. Clara Mercer's directives are explicit. Authority passes according to her conditions, and Daniel Cross meets those conditions. Gregory does not." The weight of Arthur's words pressed on the room like a closing door. Board members nodded slowly, their decision already forming. Vanessa's voice rose in desperation. "This is fraud, a scheme. Clara can't—" "Clara did," I said quietly. My words cut through hers, not with volume, but with certainty. I rose to my feet, my hand resting on Clara's letter that had guided me through every step. "Vanessa, you mistook patience for weakness. You mistook kindness for surrender. But Clara knew you. She knew Gregory. She even foresaw Ethan's arrogance, and she left me the tools to protect what we built. This isn't about fraud. This is about the truth you thought you could bury." Gregory finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "So what was I then? A placeholder? A lie?" I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw not arrogance, but pain. "You were my son in the ways that mattered. Raised, taught, loved. But you chose her shadow instead of your own strength. That was never Clara's doing. That was yours." He looked away, shame tightening his jaw. Ethan muttered something under his breath, but no one paid him any attention. For the first time, his words carried no weight. Vanessa stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. You think you've won, Howard. This isn't over. Money, power, influence. I still have them, and I'll use them. Arthur didn't even flinch. Use what you like. The law is clear. The board has spoken. And soon Daniel will stand here, not you. Silence fell. Mrs. Whitfield cleared her throat and said, Howard, you have our full support. Clara's wisdom was always steady. We see that now, more than ever. Halverson nodded. Mercer Holdings will endure because of that wisdom, and because of you. For the first time in weeks, I felt something more than resolve. I felt dignity restored, not just mine, but Clara's. Her plan had worked. Her foresight had spared me from humiliation, and spared this company from ruin. Vanessa gathered her things with trembling hands, her smile gone, her mask shattered. Gregory followed quietly, his silence heavier than anger. Ethan lingered a moment, then shuffled out, head down, no longer the arrogant boy who believed the world was his toy chest. When the door closed behind them, the air in the boardroom shifted. It felt lighter, as though Clara herself had walked through and opened every window. I looked at Arthur, and he gave me a small nod. It's done, he said. No, I replied softly. It's only beginning. Because Daniel would come soon, stepping into the place Clara had prepared for him, not as a conqueror, but as a man of integrity, and I would stand beside him, not above him, proud not just of what we had built, but of what would last after me. That night, I went to Clara's grave. The winter air was sharp, but the stars glowed clear above. I laid my hand on the stone and whispered, It's done, Clara. I did it kindly. I did it completely. And for the first time since she left me, I felt not just her absence, but her peace. The days after the showdown passed slowly, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The house was quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt purposeful, as though Clara's presence had settled into every corner, no longer just a memory, but a legacy fulfilled. News of the board's decision spread quickly. Vanessa tried to rally allies, but her influence collapsed as swiftly as it had risen. The board members had seen her greed laid bare, and once trust is broken, no charm can repair it. Gregory retreated into silence, his shame visible in the way he avoided calls, meetings, even casual greetings in public. Ethan drifted away too, his arrogance dissolved into uncertainty, no longer the boy who boasted loudly, but one who muttered excuses no one cared to hear. Daniel arrived quietly one evening, stepping into my home with the modesty of a man who had nothing to prove. He was tall, with the kind of steady presence that filled a room without demanding it. When he extended his hand, I felt Clara's touch in his grip, firm, honest, without pretense. I didn't know her well, Daniel said softly, his eyes steady on mine, but she told me enough to understand what she wanted. She trusted you, and I will too. Emotion tightened my throat. For so long I had believed myself alone, surrounded only by greed and entitlement. Now, standing before me, was the son Clara had entrusted with the future, the man who carried my blood, but more importantly, carried her values. We spent hours talking that night. He spoke of his work, his life, the simple dignity of earning rather than demanding. He hadn't come seeking wealth or power. He had come because Clara asked him to stand when the time came. And he did. In the weeks that followed, Daniel and I walked the halls of Mercer Holdings together. Where Vanessa had seen a throne, Daniel saw responsibility. Where Gregory had seen validation, Daniel saw duty. And where Ethan had seen toys, Daniel saw people, employees, families, lives intertwined with the company's future. One afternoon, as we stood in the boardroom where everything had changed, I said quietly, Clara was right. You were always meant to be here. Daniel shook his head. We were meant to be here. She trusted both of us. This isn't Just my inheritance. It's yours too. The dignity of knowing you protected her vision. His words settled deep into me, like the warmth of a fire after a long winter walk. For the first time since Clara's death, I felt not only peace, but pride. Pride in her, in myself, and in the legacy we had safeguarded. The world outside moved on, unaware of the storm that had passed within these walls. But inside, something had shifted forever. Vanessa's arrogance had crumbled, Gregory's silence had consumed him, Ethan's entitlement had collapsed. And in their place stood Daniel, steady, humble, strong. On the first spring morning after the snow melted, I returned to Clara's grave. The grass was beginning to green again, the air softer. I placed a single white rose against the stone and whispered, "It's done, Clara. You were right about everything. We stood, and we finished what you began." The wind stirred through the trees, gentle, almost like a sigh of approval, and in that moment I knew Clara wasn't gone. She was here, woven into every decision, every truth, every quiet act of dignity. The inheritance wasn't money. It wasn't property. It was legacy. And that legacy was safe.